So now that you've got that down, we're going to move on to a bit of core note taking here. So what I would like you guys to do is get this down as a subheading. You might even, if you have access to a printer or something, you might want to print that out, or you could just even draw something like that on the side of your page. So we're going to look at a measurement tool called GDP, which stands for Gross Domestic Product. So what I would like you guys to do is to write these core notes down in your book, and I'll talk you through each point. So at a global scale, most countries measure human well-being through something called GDP, Gross Domestic Product. Now, if we're to break the word Gross Domestic Product down, when we say gross, we're not meaning things that are yucky, gooey, like snot or boogers, or anything gross like that. Another meaning of the word gross is total, or the total amount of something. So when we're looking at the word gross here, we're looking at total amount. Okay, so you might want to annotate that on the side for you. Now when we're looking at the word domestic here, a lot of us think of that word as things relating to our home life. But in this sort of context, the word domestic here is meaning the country or the local country, right, that it's investigating. And then product is, well, a product it can mean a few different things. Here what it's looking at is the product of a country. So how wealthy is a country is essentially what we're looking at here. So if we break all this down, gross domestic product, we're looking at what's the total amount of goods and services produced by a country each year. So that's pretty much the second dot point here, is breaking that thought pattern down. So GDP is the total income of goods and services produced by a country each year. So what this does is it measures wealth. So how they work it out is they divide the total GDP of a country by its population, and that will calculate the GDP. So for example, Australia's GDP in 2018 was $1.43 trillion. And when we divide that by 25 million people, it equals a GDP there of $57,000 roughly per person. Now, because this measurement is used globally, and this is just our last dot point here, the idea is that the more total GDP that your country has, the better off your people will be. The better their healthcare services they'll be able to afford, the better the food will be, the better the house, technology, anything that requires money, the more money you have of it, right, you're able to get the latest version or the best version. So if we look at something like a car, for example, if we have $100,000 and we have to spend that on a car, we're obviously going to get a much better quality car than we would if we had to spend $20,000 on a car. And so the idea with GDP is that the more money a country earns, the more investment it can place in its people and its services, and that's going to improve the overall human well-being and quality of life of people within that country. So that's the main thought pattern behind GDP. So once you've written all that in your books, move to the next slide. Now, this map again, I'm going to post on Classroom one sheet, which has this map and then this little bit of a graph that we're going to use later. Now, if you do have a printer at home, it would be great if you could print that off and glue it in your book. But if you don't, that's fine. Or if the printer's busy or held up, that's okay. But we still want to answer the 3 questions that go along with it here. Okay. So question 1. So once this is, I'll explain what this map is first. So this is a geography skill we call a Choropleth Map, and what it does is it shows us, it has a little scale here, and it measures different countries based off a certain criteria, and it shades them different colours depending on how strong or weak they are in that section. So for example here, the legend here is looking at gross domestic product per capita in US dollars. Per capita means per country. And so we're looking at countries that have over $25,000 per person in their GDP is the darkest shade of purple we can see there. So if we look at the maps, I want you to tell me which 3 continents have the highest GDP. So continents have been labelled on this map. You've got Europe, Africa, Asia, Australia, South America, and North America there. So which 3 continents, according to this Choropleth map, have the highest GDP? So list the names of those continents there. Then I want you to do the same thing, but which 3 continents have the lowest GDP? So under $1,000 per person, okay? So per capita, means per person, per country. I'll elaborate on that. So again, our continents are Australia, South America, North America, Asia, Europe, and Africa. Which 3 continents have the lowest GDP? What I want you to then do in question 3 is to justify. Let me just bring this up here. I can't see because my head's in the way. I'll just move this to the side now. So justify the variations of GDP, or justify, the spatial variations of the world's GDP. So what this question is asking you to look at is to, remember if we go back here to justify, we're giving reasons for something, okay? So we're justifying why is it that the 3 countries, or 3 continents, that you have selected, why do you think they have the highest GDP? And why do you think the 3 continents that you've selected have the lowest GDP? Why do they have the lowest GDP? So you're justifying, you're giving reasons why something is the way it is, okay? So say for example, you picked the continents with the 3 lowest. Why did you choose that? Okay, what are some impacts on human well-being, or what are some things about those countries that you know will produce low GDP than other countries? So answer those. Again, if you're not sure on any of those questions, post it in the comments below, because other people might be thinking the same thing as you, and you'll be able to help them out. What we're going to do next, once you have done that, is we're going to do some think questions. So I want you to write both of these questions in your book and leave a bit of space below them. So the first question is looking at compare your criteria of human well-being against what GDP measures, and how are they different. So a few lessons ago, in lesson 1, you wrote a definition of human well-being, what it is for you, okay? I want you to compare your definition with the definition of GDP, where they're saying that human well-being is pretty much based on how much money a country earns. Is that different from your measurement of human well-being? If so, what is it, and why might it be a bit different? And then what I want you to look at in question 2 is, what do you think the potential implication is? So implication being problem. So what do you think the potential problem of measuring human well-being based off GDP could be? What important indicators do you think it might be missing, or it might ignore? So in other words, what do you think's basing the measurement of a country's human well-being solely based on how much money they earn? What could be the problem with that? Answer it below, and your teacher will obviously check those answers there for you. So once you have done that, we're going to look at our second indicator of human well-being here. And this is a different measurement tool. So other than GDP, there's one called the OECD, which stands for the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. So these guys didn't like that GDP only compared to what they say here is the cold numbers and economic statistics, so just how much money someone earns. They created 11 different criteria to base this off. So money is definitely one of them, as we can see income here, but they based it off a few more things, such as housing, jobs, community, education, environment, civic engagement, so how well do you engage with your community, health, life satisfaction, safety, and a work-life balance. So this was Australia's OECD rating. The work-life balance and income were 2 of the lowest points, but everything else here you can see is in that top 25% and is generally pretty high. So that means we'd have a pretty good OECD ranking. So what OECD does is it measures not just based off money, although it does include that. It measures a lot of different other things. Now, a lot of these are essential things that we've looked at before, so things like housing, safety, your health. But then there's some other things that are not essential to living, but it still measures. So things like a work-life balance or civic engagement. These things are really important, but they're not necessarily essential for our human everyday to-day survival. But they still impact our well-being. So what I want you to do is, for question 1, again, if you can glue this into your book, that would be fantastic. But if you can't because you don't have access to a printer, that's okay. You can still look at it here and answer the questions. So question 1 is rank the topics in OECD according to their importance to you. So see all of these things here, these 11 things: housing, income, jobs, community, education, etc. I want you to write a list 1 to 11 on what is the most important for your human well-being there. Okay? Then what I want you to do is justify using the OECD instead of GDP to measure human well-being. Now remember, if we go back to the word justify, we're giving reasons why something is good and we're backing that up with detail. So I need you to give me reasons why. This question is asking you to give reasons why the OECD is better at measuring human well-being than GDP. So I want you to write that question down, justify it, and answer it. That's the last activity for today. What I want you to do, as usual, is tick or cross that success criteria. Let your teacher know if you didn't quite understand today's lesson so they can be in contact with you. Thank you.